Our focus question is going to be, how can you decide if a table or an equation represents a linear relationship? So we're going to be looking at tables and graphs and determining that. Before we get started, there's some vocabulary words that we'll have to go over. X-intercept, points where a graph crosses the x-axis or when y equals 0. The y-intercept is the point where the point where a graph crosses the y-axis or where x equals 0. Coefficient, the number that multiplies a variable in an equation. The m in y equals mx plus b is our coefficient when we're looking at linear relationships. So the m is our coefficient to that x. We'll go further into that, I think in these notes or in our next notes. And solution of the equation is an ordered pair that makes the equation true and lies on the graph of the line. So ordered pairs. Ordered pairs is always written as parenthesis x, comma, y, parenthesis. That is an ordered pair. So if I ask you for a certain point on a graph, on where it lies on the line or something, I don't want you to just write x equals 2, y equals 3. That's not how we write it. We write it like this in these parentheses. And then again up here, the b in this equation, in y equals mx plus b, is our y-intercept. So when I say what is the y-intercept when we're looking at an equation that is y equals mx plus b, if it's in that form, that type of equation, to find the y-intercept, you're going to be looking for your b, which is right here. Does that make sense to everyone? We'll get some practice with that as we go on today. So if we get started, it says, in problem 2.2, we came up with an equation and a graph for both Henry and Emil. Henry's equation, they were nice and gave us the equations. They said d equals t plus 45. And Emil, they said d equals 2.5t. Okay. Well, they put this in that form, y equals mx plus b, for us. And they were also nice enough to even graph it. So all we have to do is answer their questions. We don't have to make a table right now. We don't have to make a graph. We're just looking at the points that they made and what they told us and answering the questions. So if we go on here, it says, what is the coefficient for Henry's equation? When we look up at Henry's equation, based on that little vocabulary review that we just had at the beginning, at the top of the page, what is our coefficient, Ava Demers? Okay, so our t, this is really y equals mx plus b. So in this equation, Ava, they replaced y with a d, and they replaced their x with a t, which is fine. They do that sometimes, depending on what we're talking about. In this case, we're talking about distance and time, so they changed it to d and t. Yeah.
It says the coefficient is the m.
Right. So the t is representing the x right now. So what is our m really? 1. Since there's no number before that t, then we have to assume that it's just a 1. Does that make sense? Any questions as to why we have a 1 there? If it said 2d, then our coefficient is 2. So what is the y-intercept? Like we stated at the top, we can either look at our equation or at our graph because it is stated in both of those. So Ashley, how would you like to answer this? So you're going to look at your equation or your graph? The graph, okay. So where's your y-intercept? Or what is it? What's the number? 45. Okay, so they even wrote it out for us. But if we look at our graph here, in green, this is my x-axis. And then I'll make it in red. Here is my y-axis. So if we look back, oh, that's not a straight line. But if we look back, to our vocabulary words and what a y-intercept means, it said the point where a graph crosses the y-axis. So in the red is my y-axis, right, Ashley? So I know they stated it for us here, but if we look in our graph, okay, here's my y-axis, There's my line. Okay, it crosses the x-axis, the y-axis right here. Well, what number is that? In this case, it's 45. If we were to look at our equation, they told us that our b represents our y-axis, our y-intercept. So here's my y equals mx plus b. So my b is stated up there as 45. That's how we can do it using the equation or the graph, whatever you prefer. So going on to Emil's, they gave you the equation d equals 2.5t. And they also plotted all of this, all the points in the graph for you. And they asked the same questions. What is your coefficient? And what is your y-intercept? So I'm going to give you about 1 minute to work with your shoulder partners to determine what the coefficient is and what the y-intercept is for Emil. About 1 minute. Everyone come back together. The coefficient for Emil. Sal, what is the coefficient for Emil? Yep. 2.5. Thank you. The coefficient is the m, like stated in our vocabulary. And if this is our x and this is our y, we know this is our m here. Now our y-intercept is a little tricky. So Lily, you want to help us out here?
Well, I was on the graphic, it says 0, 0 for the y-intercept.
Okay.
So I put just 0.
Okay, so you just looked at the graph for it, which is completely fine. Here's our y-axis. We want the y-intercept, so that is where the line crosses. Yes, it is 0, 0, so we would just put 0. Another way to find it is we don't have a plus something here or minus something here. So if there's not anything stated there, then that means it's 0, because you don't really ever see people put 2.5t plus 0. There's really no point in that plus 0. So if there's just an mx and no b listed, that really means your b is a 0. Okay, Elena?
We put 0, 0. Is that okay? Or is that like...
Yeah, you can put that. That's fine. You're a little ahead of the game on that, but you're not wrong. So that's fine. As long as you know what that means and how it's listed. Okay, so if we go on, if 0, 45 is 0, 45 a solution of Henry's equation? Now they're asking us, is that exact coordinate? 0, 45. Is that on Henry's equation? Or on his graph? Stephanie? Yes, why do you think so? Yes, because what? Okay, so let's look at it on the graph. They told us that our x is 0, right? So let's look at where that point lies on the graph, and let's see if it's true. Okay, so here's 0, and then they said my y is 45, so I'm going to go up 45. Okay, well, I'm right there. Does that point lie on the graph? Yes, it does. And we can say that just because this, all we can say is yes, because this point lies on the graph. There's really nothing else to it besides we looked at the graph, and yes, that point goes across our linear line. And it says, what would, this is wrong, it's written wrong. What would t be if, this is supposed to be if, not is. What would t be if t, 48 is a solution? So they said t, 48. They're not giving us what our x is, but they're telling us that our y is 48. And we are still looking at Henry's equation. So we know, because they listed it above, I'm going to rewrite it down here, that Henry's equation is d equals t plus 45. Okay. My y is my d. My t is my x. Right? Because this is in y equals mx plus b form. So my t is my x. Well, we don't know t. That's what we want to find. But we know our y. So Robert, what would I do? Yeah, there's no coefficient in front of it, but I want to find the distinct number for my t. So, but I do know my y. my 48. D is our y. So why don't I plug 48 in for D equals t plus 45 and simply solve for t? Do a one-step equation here. How would I solve for t? I want to get t by itself. Joey? Subtract 45 to get it away from that t. Since it's t plus 45, we do the opposite sign and we're going to subtract it. So my 45 minus 45 cancels out because it's 0. And on the right, I'm left with t. And then I have to do the same thing to the left. So 48 minus 45 gives me 3. So when they say, what would t be? Well, t would be 3. They're asking us to do a one-step equation. Going on to the next one, it says, what would D be if 10 comma D is a solution? This is the exact same thing. They're just giving us the opposite one. Last time they wanted T, and now they want D. So we're going to use that same exact equation. And they told us what our T is, because they said it was 10. With your shoulder partners for 1 minute. Come up with what D is. This is another one-step equation just like we did up above. So I will give you 1 minute to solve D. Gavin, what did you put for D? What did you find out?
Our table said that was 4. D was 4.
How did you get that? They told us what our T was, right?
Yeah.
What is our T?
10.
Okay. So knowing our T, can't we plug that in for our T in our equation that we know? Which is the equation I wrote on the board, D equals T plus 45. Well, what is my T again, Gavin? What is my T? Right here.
Oh, 10.
10. My T is 10. So I can plug in my 10 for my T. And when I do that, Gavin, what do I get? 10 plus 45 gives me 55. Hand on your head if you got 55. Hand on your head. Give yourself a pat on the head. All right, so if we go on, problem 2.3, Miss Chang's class decides to give t-shirts to each person who participates in the walkathon. They receive bids for the cost of the shirts from 2 different companies. Mighty T's T charges $49 plus $1 per shirt. No Shrink Tea charges $4.50 per shirt. Okay. So based on that information that they just told us, what we want to start off doing is writing an equation. Henry and Emil were nice enough to give us their equation, so all we had to do was break it apart and determine what everything was. Well, now we're going to take it a step further and take this word problem and make our own equation. They said that let C represent the cost and let N represent the number of t-shirts. So let's look at Mighty T first. Aiden. Yeah, the proper way to put it is the word let in front of it. So Mighty T, we want to find our C. We don't know the total cost, do we? We don't. So Mighty T is going to be C equals, because we don't know our total cost. And how much do they charge per shirt? Yeah.
They charge $1 per shirt, so
Okay, $1 per shirt, so how would I put that? Yes, it would just be N because they said they charge $1 per shirt. Technically, if you really want, you can put a 1N, but that 1N is not needed, and you can just write N. But if you feel more comfortable writing 1N, that's fine. But Mason, we're missing something else to it. What else do they tell us about the Mighty T's? Yeah, they charge an additional $49. So there's our equation. Break it apart. Go step by step. Same thing with the no shrink T. We know we're finding the total cost, but we don't know what that is. So now based on what they told us, what would the rest of my equation be, Robert? For the no shrink T. C. Not
Because it's
per t-shirt is $4.50. Well, how many t-shirts? What did we do up here? $1 per t-shirt, and we had N. So $4.50 per t-shirt. We can't exactly add it together. Lily,
C plus
what else?
N.
4.50 N. Because if I say, Robert, this paper is $2, and I'm going to give you 2. Well, what's your total? 2 times, right, it's 4. 2 times however many I give you, which is what we're doing here. We don't know how many t-shirts, but we know one is $4.50. So however, whenever I say I put 3 shirts in now, I can do $4.50 times 3 and figure out the total cost. That's why we're multiplying it and not adding it. Okay, so going on, it says in part A, what is the y-intercept for each equation? The y-intercept. We're going on to the y-intercept. Mighty T's, what is their y-intercept, Becky? Mighty T is our first one we did. C equals n plus 49. 49. Our y-intercept, here's our equation again. And Becky, what variable represents the y-intercept? In the equation that I just wrote? B. Good job. So when we look at our equation, C equals n plus 49, well, my 49 is our B. If we go on to the no shrink T's, Brayden, a little trickier here. What is my y-intercept? Looking at those equations. I'm sorry? Not exactly, because look at my equation, y equals mx plus b, and then look at the equation we have, c equals 4.5n. They're somewhat similar, aren't they? What's that n mean? Okay, that's similar to our x, right? What's the 4.5 mean? What's that similar to down here? That's similar to our m. Okay, well, we know that y-intercept is our b. Do we have a b? No, so what does that mean when we don't have a b? What is it? It's 0. Exactly. So to find the y-intercept, you're going to be looking out here to the right. But since there's nothing there, it's just 0. It says explain. So we can explain this. Let me move this down. Say, I know the y-intercept is the initial, oops, it's the I wrong, is the initial payment for each company. That's the initial payment, that Y that we start off with. It is also the B value in y equals mx plus b, which is what we use to find the y-intercepts in part A. We use that equation and looked at our b. So below that it says, what does the y-intercept represent? Looking at these equations, Elena, what does the y-intercept represent? Okay. Okay, so we can say the y-intercept, very good, is, we could say the initial fee or charge the initial fee or charge. In part B, it says what is the coefficient for both of those equations that we created above? Our C equals n plus 49 and our C equals 4.5n. Well, mighty T and the no shrink T. I'll give you 1 minute with your shoulder partners to determine what the coefficients are for both of them. And you can go on to try to explain below it if you'd like. I'll give you 1 minute. Let's come back together. Everyone come back together. Let's go on to B. Mighty T's coefficient. Sam, what did you find for the coefficient for mighty T? 1. How did you find that? Okay. So when we have the equation, this is what our equation was, Sam. We're looking for the coefficient. So we look at this, because our mx, our m is our coefficient. Well, right here, we don't have anything in place of our m. Since there's nothing there, we assume that it's a 1. Mason, you have a question? Oh, okay. Okay, and then the no shrink t. Anthony, no shrink t. The coefficient.
For the coefficient,
Yeah.
it's $4.50.
Okay. $4.50. And again, how did you find that?
I quantified
The m. So you looked at the equation C equals 4.5n, and you looked at where your m was because you knew the m was a coefficient. So every time they ask for our coefficients, we look for our m, which is before our x. In this case, our x is n, so before your variable. So we can explain this by it is the number being multiplied by n. It is the m in y equals mx plus b. What does the coefficient represent? Gracie. Oh, bathroom. Isabel. What does the coefficient represent?
The number that's being multiplied by a variable.
Yeah, it's the number being multiplied by the variable. In this case, the variable represents what? Or n. What's the n represent?
The number of t-shirts.
The number of t-shirts. Good. So this is the amount the company charges per t-shirt. Sorry, per t-shirt. So depending on Mighty T's, which is 1 per t-shirt, no shrink is $4.50 per t-shirt. Going on, let's try to get through 2. Steve says, what is the independent variable? What is the dependent variable? Let's see, where's my page? So looking...
The books next year are all based off this book. This book is very important.
So we kind of looked back at this in our first investigation a little bit. Dependent and independent variables. What represents our independent variable when in that scenario that they gave us in problem 2.3? Anthony Marisi? What would our independent variable be? Do you want me to reread the scenario? Okay, it says Miss Chang's class decides to give t-shirts for each person who participates in the walkathon. They receive bids for the cost of shirts from 2 different companies. Mighty T's charges $49 plus $1 per shirt, and No Shrink Tea charges $4.50 per shirt. So that's the scenario that we keep looking at, and we're going to continue with that on the next page, where we ask for the independent variable. So based on that information, what would our independent variable be? So our independent variable, in this scenario, we're looking at t-shirts, which is our n, the number of t-shirts. We're looking at our c, which is the total cost. So based on those 2 things, because that's all they gave us was our c and our n, Which one of those would be our independent variable? Which means it determines our dependent. Yeah, C and N. It would be our N, which is our number of shirts. Depending on the number of shirts we have, determines the cost, the total cost that we're going to get. So our independent variable is our number of shirts. Good job, Anthony. Because we don't exactly know. They didn't tell us how many shirts. But that determines our cost. So what is our dependent variable then? Zane? The cost. Good job. That cost is dependent on the amount of shirts. So for 2A, for each company, what is the cost for 12 t-shirts? Show your work and explain how you know this. Mighty T's. What's our equation for Mighty T again? We created it on the other side. Lily, what was it? C equals N plus 49. Well, now they tell us that we have 12 t-shirts. Where am I going to plug that 12 in? Where N is, because that's the amount of shirts. We want to find what the cost is. Well, 12 plus 49 gives you what? $61. So that is my total cost for the Mighty T's. Now the no shrink. My equation, C equals 2.5N. Again, what would I do, Eliana? I have the equation C equals 2.5N, and they told me that I have 12 t-shirts. 2.5 times... Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's 4.5, not 2.5. Thank you. 4.5 times 12. All I'm doing is plugging it into my equation where it's appropriate to. Well, if I do 4.5 times 12, Eliana, what do I get? 54. So when they said, show your work, explain how you know this, showing my work right here, what I just did, plugging it in where it's appropriate and simplifying it down to the answer, that's showing my work, and that's really explaining like how I know that. So on a quiz or test, when we ask for this, that's what I'm expecting to see on the work part of it, okay? Let's try B. It says for each company, what is the cost for 20 t-shirts? Explain how you know this. Show your work. Well, we want to find 20 t-shirts now. So we're going to do the same thing. Mighty T is C equals N plus 49. So, Sophia, what do I do for this? Okay, 20. I plug that in for my N. And what do I get? $69. Awesome. And then again, I'm going to do the same thing for the no shrink T's. Philip, my equation, C equals 4.5N, right? Because we created that on that last page. We're staying with the same equations and everything. If they told me 20 t-shirts and they want to find the cost, how am I going to determine the cost? Multiply it. Where am I going to multiply it? I'm going to plug it in for what? I'm going to plug my 20 in where? I'm plugging it in. Are you saying in replace of the N?
No.
Where should I do it then?
Yeah.
My N represents the number of t-shirts. So if they tell me, hey, you have 20 t-shirts, I just get rid of that N and plug my 20 in for it. So Philip, what would my total cost be now that I have an equation? I just need to simplify it. 4.5 times 20. I'm going to borrow a calculator. $90. Awesome. $90. So again, when we have a table, a graph, an equation, they can ask us whatever question they want, and we should be able to answer it. We're going to finish this up later. There's no homework today.